Great. Good morning. Good morning again. Good morning. My name is Erica Walker. I am here on behalf of the United Way Board of Directors. I want to welcome you to the second annual Black History panel. Today, United Way looks to take time to honor the sacrifices and contributions of African Americans in our country, as well as in our community. After today, I hope that you will want to become involved with the efforts that United Way has ongoing to serve as a model for diversity and inclusion in our area. Give me a second. We believe that it takes a diverse group of partners to find solutions to complex issues. Again, I hope that you find ways to become involved with United Way because the purpose is to advance the mission and equity, as well as achieving child, family, and community well-being. I'd like to welcome Pastor Andrea Franklin here to provide the invocation before we get started. Pastor Andrea? Y'all can clap if you want.
Good morning. Good morning. Let us pray. Gracious and eternal Father, we come reverencing you on today. You are King of Kings, God, your Lord of Lords. We have come now asking for your blessings. We ask that your anointing be dwelled richly upon us on today. We ask you to continue, God, to bless the efforts and the works of the United Way. Continue to bind us together in love. It is in Christ's name we pray. Thank God and amen. Amen.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here today. United Way of the Chattahoochee Valley celebrates Black History Month, recognizing the contributions made by African Americans in our country and our community. Our goal today is to educate our community about the contributions African Americans have made in the journey towards all people having basic human and American rights, and get into some issues of foremost importance in our current time. I'm happy to be moderating this panel, and it's an honor for me to do so. With us, we have 4 outstanding community leaders and United Way supporters all, who will share insight into their experience of being Black in America and their wishes for the future. So let's get started. To begin, we would like to go around and ask everyone to please share your name, position, and organization, and then we will get to our first question. I'll initially direct each question to a panelist, but the hope is that this will be conversational, so please jump in after they have finished answering and add your perspective. So we'll go first to Geniece.
Okay. Hello, good morning. Good morning. Seeing the work in this room is great. My name is Geniece Granville. I am the Vice President of Davis Broadcasting. We're a radio broadcasting company. We do radio and digital based here in Columbus, Georgia, with radio stations in both Columbus and Atlanta. It is an honor to be a part of this event and to be sitting here with such a distinguished panel, which I really respect very much.
And you may take your masks off if you're more comfortable, or leave them on.
Carlos Coleman. I serve as the lead pastor at New Birth Outreach Church in Midland, Georgia. We do a host of outreach programs around town. I've been serving there going on my 8th year now as the lead pastor as well. And so we have a school there as well, Emmanuel Preparatory School of Math and Science, and it's just for boys. And thank you so much for the invitation today to kind of share our experience.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Just gotta make sure. My name is Sherricka. Most of you will probably say that you know me from being out and about. That's what I hear all the time. I see you everywhere. And so I do a lot in the community when it comes to youth. I have my own nonprofit called Minor in Business, where I help youth learn about entrepreneurship, just trying to teach them things that some of us learn later in life and let them know that they can start early on. So I do that. I'm a heavy art advocate in the community, so just trying to get more public art in our city, and then just doing all things good to make Columbus a better place.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Geniece Flakes III. I'm the shepherd of the Fourth Street Missionary Baptist Church. We're in the historic district, and we are a community-based church where we lift up Christ, but we also connect to the community through many ministries that the Lord has allowed us to have, and so we just want to make a difference in what Christ can see through us. So thank you so very much for allowing me to be here this morning, and thank you for your presence as well.
Thank you all. So we'll get into our questions now. Our first question I'll direct to Geniece, since she is first on my right here. We have a responsibility as a nation to celebrate all the accomplishments African Americans have made. The United States has done a better job in recent decades of honoring and recognizing African Americans for their contributions and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the present reality is still a shortage of Black Americans in C-suite positions. Only 8% of all C-suite positions in the country are filled by Black Americans, and only 1% by Black women. And a growing wealth gap. White household wealth is 7 to 8 times greater than Black household wealth. What steps need to be taken to close the economic gap and that C-suite gap for African Americans in our nation?
First of all, thank you for the question, which is an excellent question. It's filled with really thought-provoking topics. So let me address the first one, the C-suite. Something that I think that's got to happen is we have to be intentional, and we have to decide with the C-suite conversation and with the wealth gap conversation. We have to decide if we care. I know this is a bit difficult, but the question is, do we really care? Does it really matter? Does it matter to everyone in the country that this improves? Because it will take everyone in the country for it to improve. And if we do decide that we care, I think we have to be really intentional in making sure that we are diversifying our leadership. And you'll hear me say this for a lot of the questions. Leadership matters. Leadership is determining who's sitting at that table. It's determining who we're hiring at the very bottom level of our companies, how we're promoting. So my things are, we just need to be intentional in making sure there's room for everyone at the table, but that we put leadership in place that's going to make sure that happens. Ideas and thoughts are great, but the people who have the power to make the hiring decisions, those are the ones who have to have the feeling and the desire to lessen that gap.
Excellent. Any other thoughts on this topic?
Well, in our country, when she says to see if we're interested in making a difference, that we is America. There are many different diverse programs for minorities in our country for business owners, and we've seen that throughout the years that typically the bottom line is these major corporations shoot to have 3% of minority business from their vendors, and they're large corporations, and they very rarely reach that 3%. And with this digital age, a lot of times they're accomplishing that by using software companies to do software by minority companies and making up the gap for that. That's just one individual or one small company out of the thousands and thousands of companies that are minority owned throughout the country. And with the C-suite positions, that comes from influence and persuasion. We have a high purchase rate as minorities. I mean, we purchase a lot, but being able to retain and save a lot is really where we fall behind. But if our purchasing power can be leveraged in those C-suite positions, if we make decisions that we're not moving forward with certain companies if they don't equally represent us in those C-suite positions as well.
Excellent. Reverend Flakes.
Yeah, I think that in order to truly get to the C-suite positions, there has to be a change in one's perception with those who are on boards, those who are already in C-suite positions. And what that means is we have to deconstruct how we actually see who sits in those suites. C-suite, the chief executive officers, the chief financial officers. And sometimes I think there are particular perceptions that says many minorities may not be equipped or quote unquote qualified to sit in those seats. And so unless there is a conscious and intentional discussion that really changes and shift the mindset that African Americans are very equipped and qualified to be that CEO or that chief executive officer. Not just one out of, but we have to be intentional, as has already been mentioned, to place opportunities in place to make sure that they are being groomed, they are being positioned, and that those opportunities will come. I think we have a perfect example right now with Brian Flores in the NFL. So I think that is a clear indication of what I'm really looking forward to. Thank you.
Yeah, there's only one black head coach in a league right now with majority African American players. So, and a class action suit filed very courageously by Coach Flores, because he may never work in the NFL again, given that he's filed this suit. So a lot of personal sacrifice. Excellent. Sherricka?
Okay, so I think your question was about lift. I wanted to hit on that. When I'm riding up and down my side of town, so I'm on the east side of town, a lot of the things that I see are the lottery stores, the lotto markets, different things like that. Once you get past like south and east side of Columbus, all of that stops. And you start to see the banks and different things where a certain side, and I'm not saying that it's people from the south side or east side can't go to those places, but we are not exposed to that as much as we're exposed to get rich quick, or spending all your money on lotto tickets. And so to me, when you have that emphasized in a community, when that's what you grow up with and that's what you see, then that might be what you see as an opportunity for me to actually, that's how I can become wealthy, when it's not. Expose black people and brown people to other opportunities, to learn about finances, to learn about how to get their family to a place where they can be successful and maintain wealth versus like the get quick rich scheme. So I kind of always, when I'm riding home, I look at that because I'm like, how many times do we have to, every other store is a lotto store, change that and change our environment so that the kids can also see something different.
Excellent. Thank you. Any further thoughts on this topic before we move on?
Do you want to deal with the wealth gap as
Yes,
well?
absolutely.
There's so much discussion nationally on how to do that. And I would just, in terms of local, I think Sherricka brought tremendous points to the forefront in observations. But in terms of, as a people, for African Americans, in order to close that wealth gap, there has to be intentional policies put in place as it relates to education, as it relates to looking at reparation. And I know that is a contentious, a very challenging discussion, but I do believe that is the way that we close that wealth gap between African Americans and whites. But also creating jobs. And I know right now we're saying a lot of jobs, but the question becomes, what type jobs? What's the salary? What's the income? And income and wealth, we have to maybe define what the difference is there. But I really do think that it has to be intentional, and our government has to play a part in that as well. Thank you.
And creating the expectations for our youth that they can ascend to these C-suite jobs. Excellent. All right, we'll move on to the second question here for you, Reverend Coleman. What do you think is the most profound moment of African American history in the USA? Why did you choose this moment?
So I really appreciate these easy questions. We're going to solve all of this in 90 minutes. But yeah, so thinking about that is a very hard question. When you think of all the accomplishments of African Americans in our country, when you think about the rich history here, since we were brought to the shores of this country, I think the most profound, when we look back on it, because it's being challenged today, is probably the Voting Rights Act. When you think about the men and women who were murdered and challenged, their children were bullied and dogs were released on them, and to withstand that moment, it must have been important because individuals did not want that to happen, and that allowed us to pave the way to see our first African-American president. And so I think that if that had never happened, we never would have seen that first family in the White House. And so I think that kind of set everything in motion for that to happen. And we know it's significant because of the anger and the tension that has existed since that family occupied that space. And even those that continue to talk about it, and the change of the voting rights in individual states. And so I think that from the time that we arrived till now, I just think the Voting Rights Act and the men and women who sacrificed their lives and gave up all that they could for us to simply walk up to the government center and cast a ballot is just remarkable.
Yeah, I think this question, like you said, this easy softball question really is one that it really made me think. Profound moments. I think I would say that desegregation of schools. This was an opportunity for people of all races to sit in the same classroom, not for the purposes of purchasing anything, but for the purposes of what was desired to be on equal playing field for people to learn the same information and have the same opportunities. And there have actually been studies that showed that this was one of the major times in our history where that wealth gap began to lessen. The educational opportunities that were provided for students when they, got a chance to sit in those classes with better resources, with better, with knowledge, period. The opportunities opened up. However, I would say it's profound not just because it allowed us to be in the same room, which is important today, because if we don't sit next to each other, we will begin to have our own prejudices. I think it opened up the door to say, oh, that's what a Black person thinks and laughs at and looks like and deals with every day. I think it opened our eyes to sitting next to people and realizing people are just, we definitely have more in common than we do that are differences. However, it also created some really difficult instances of where I think African Americans, some will say we lost some community, some will say we lost some identity, and those things I think have created some distance in the African American community now, which very much needs a village in order for us to deal with some of the concerns that we have. So I think it was profound, both good, but I think there were some things that we would need to revisit. And even some of the people in Brown v. Board of Education who are part of that movement have asked people to revisit some of the things, the unintended consequences of desegregation. So I think that was a profound one.
What is your take on the current situation that we have with a lot of analysts saying that some of these new voting laws across states and here in Georgia are hurting African Americans and their ability to get out and vote in block? What do you think about that?
Well, I think, first of all, whenever you take away accessibility, that you are going to affect the people who have the least. So, unfortunately, Columbus, along with a lot of other cities, have a huge poverty level. So I think whenever you take accessibility and power and impact in the community, that you're going to affect those who have the least. And unfortunately, African Americans still in the city have the least. So, yes, I think there's some power that comes with the community, and I think these laws are starting to dilute that, and I think that will impact the Voting Rights Act and in essence, our future. So there's some positives and some negatives, but I think it just means that people really have to be paying attention. People really have to be intentional about going to, the ballot box, wherever it is, whenever it is.
Right.
But accessibility is going to create disenfranchisement.
Further thoughts? A profound moment in history or continuation of the conversation on voting rights?
I'll yield for that.
So I struggle with this question as well, because there are so many profound moments. All I could settle on was every time we wake up and we survive through the day, I feel like it's profound. We're living in a country that wasn't designed for us. And so having to try to make a way for yourself and for your family and get people to see past your skin, that's profound. It's a struggle, you know, the fact that we have to ask, like, it's 2022, and it's a lot of questions about still, like, we're making our first, like the first, you know, African Americans do this, the first, I'm blown away that we're still at first, you know. And so I just feel like for every Rosa Parks, for every Mom Rainey, for everyone that has paved the way for us ahead of time, that's profound. And we're still living in those moments where we have to carry a torch or be the first to be in a C-suite, you know, or try to convince somebody that, you know, all you want to do is you just want to survive, you know, you just want to be looked at as an equal. So like I said, I struggled because I was like, I feel like every time our feet hit the ground is profound.
And I feel exactly the same as these panelists do. I struggled with it. I really was going back and forth with what happened in 1921 in a place called Tulsa, Oklahoma. You know, Black Wall Street. Not a lot of people know about it. It has taken, it has gotten attention since President Biden has gone to Tulsa. And so I struggled with that. But then I went back to, I think for us, this day and time with President Barack Obama. Tremendous, profound moment. And the reason is that he got to the highest level C-suite in the world. And I was very hopeful that that was going to basically bring about, you know, what Dr. King's dream was really about. I think in some way it did, but there was also the uncovering of the ugliness in reactions and responses to this African-American strong male in the highest C-suite in the world. And that was disheartening, because I think what we actually saw was, yes, we were very proud, first and foremost, that you had an African-American who was very intelligent, accomplished, family, and had such high integrity that he understood the gravity of being in that seat, to not bring it to a place where it would dishonor not only him, but dishonor his family, but dishonor the community in which he was out in. And so I was so hopeful that it would really bring to actualization what Dr. King said, that don't judge me by the color of my skin, but by the content of my character. But then I had to really think about that, because many people think that that meant by Dr. King is that you ignore color, and that's not what he meant. He was saying black men, black women have integrity too. Black men, black women are honest. Black men, black women have a sense of dignity. So don't ignore my color, but embrace it, but also recognize my character. And I think many people don't see that, because we want to live in this constructed, intentional constructed, a colorblind society, which doesn't exist. So, thank you.
Hey, Ben, can I follow up with Carlos? Carlos, I've been in your office a bunch, and I know this isn't as profound as Barack Obama, but there's a poster in your office of Tiger Woods winning the Masters. I mean, that was significant for you in a way that it wasn't the same for me. But can you talk about that a little bit? Because when I think about it, every time I go in your office, I go, there's a lot more to that news. I think it was the front page of the Augusta Chronicle.
Yeah, so we develop over time and we change, and so I'm a lot older, when you saw that picture and when it was that important to me at that time. But it meant a lot to me. I come from a small town in Louisiana called Mansfield, and they had a country club there that I never was able to go to. It never dawned on me that black men could play golf. So we just drove by it all the time, never thought about it. It just never was an option. And later on in life, my father always encouraged us to the sky's the limit is what he shared with us. And I took that as reality. And as my career developed, and Tiger Woods came on the scene, I was in a nurturing environment at a corporation here where it was my boss at the time, David Fletcher, invited me out to play golf with him even though I couldn't play golf. I had just started learning, and so it gave me an opportunity, but then I was to go to different places to play across the Southeast and feel unwelcome. And it was such an eye-opening experience, and to see this young man go and beat everybody at a game that is not about brute or strength, it's about mind. And for him to be able to accomplish that was a very proud moment for me. It's sports, so it kind of doesn't compare to the Civil Rights Act, but it was a big deal for me.
And I won't share that first tee shot you hit.
Yeah, please don't. And I won't share what you called it either. So.
But sports has long been a groundbreaking activity for African Americans. Jackie Robinson comes to mind, certainly Muhammad Ali, and now Coach Flores with his lawsuit against the NFL. So it certainly is a stage where you can see profound change take place earlier, perhaps, than society is ready for it. All right, yes?
One thing you said, something I've been thinking about these last 2 years, someone said to me, one of the most profound things that's happened in the last 2 years outside of the horrendous consequences of COVID was listening to George Floyd call for his mother. And people across the country, similar to the civil rights movement, who had an opportunity to see into the life of someone else and to see their hurt and for it to resonate with them, regardless of their race or their age. There was a connection to the fact that we all have a mother. We are all human in that way. And someone said that was the most profound thing that's happened when it comes to the modern day civil rights movement, is that it opened up the eyes of society to see the injustices that were happening on that day and also around the country. And I have to say that unfortunately that's what happened, when the hoses were let loose, in Selma, is that the country had a chance to see, oh, this is real. This is really happening. It's not a news article, it's not a Facebook post. And I think that was a profound moment and hopefully something that's a lasting eye-opener in our society now.
Well, as it happens, we have a question here that directly relates to that, so why don't I go to that and I'll direct this to Sherricka. 2020 was a year spotlighting social injustice. Because of technology, we all became witness to the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. In 2021, we saw the guilty verdicts of those responsible for their deaths. As we all know, there are many cases of unarmed black men and women being killed in similar circumstances. What needs to happen in the United States to ensure African Americans have equitable opportunities for justice?
Very deep question. Oh my goodness. So I think it does start with perception, for one. There's difference between a black boy walking through a neighborhood with his friends. Someone looks at him as a troublemaker, or he's about to do something, or whatever, versus somebody of another ethnicity, white or whatever, where they're just looked at differently. I think people have to change their mindsets when it comes to how they look at black people, especially black men. Having a brother and a dad that are Black, the feeling is different, you know, when they're out, when they leave the house. My mom has always said this about my brother, like he lives in Atlanta, but getting a phone call at a weird time of night, you know, she doesn't know what that's gonna be, because there have been plenty of times where he's been minding his business, and because he looks a certain way, people are ready to assume that the worst in him, and it's total opposite. So I think we have to change perceptions. It goes into our judicial system as well. The laws are just not, again, it's not made for Black and brown people. And so even watching the news, so I relate a lot of it to personal because I just do a lot of observations, but in watching the news, what do we see? Every news story usually involves a young Black man that has committed crimes or has done something. And I've asked, I'm like, so are they the only ones? You know, because there's gotta be other stories. Like, these are the only people that we see in the news all the time. But I've been told, you know, that no, that's what people are drawn to. That's what people are gonna watch, and that's what people know. There are people of all races committing crimes, but those are not highlighted. They're kept out of the spotlight. So it starts in so many different ways. The media, make it an equal playing field. Black men are always put in a negative light instead of, you know, on the same playing field with someone else. So I think I've gone around in a circle, but basically perception is one. And like I said, just looking at the laws, the system, you know, if a young Black boy gets pulled over for, if he has weed in his pocket and he's sent off to jail for this long extended period of time, what does that do, you know, for him? Is it necessary? You know, get to the root of the problem, you know, and then treat it the same way. If it was a young white boy, he's not going away for the same amount of time. And then when the young Black boy gets out, his life, like, there's so many strikes against him when he's already served his time, you know. So I could go on and on about it, but I just think we have to change how we look, how we treat Black men, because it impacts the family across the board.
And her word is perception, because I believe in my heart that there are people that are not minorities that don't understand what this message is about. This is unreal. I can't believe that so much is against a certain race of people, but it's our reality. So I don't paint with a wide brush that everyone who's white just doesn't understand, or everyone who's white wants to take away my voting rights. But I do know that there's a perception issue. And if you've never been in that seat, I wouldn't expect you to understand what that feels like. Most of you know me, you've seen me around town doing what I do. 2 years ago, moving something with a trailer on the back of my truck. I'm running, got stuff to do. What'd I do? The light was turning red. What did I do? I sped up, went through the light. Woo! Pulled me over. Had both my sons in there. They're both of age that they can learn. And pistol out, middle of the day on a Saturday. It was obvious I was moving things around. Get out of the car. You ran through that red light. Next time, you're gonna pay the consequence, the whole nine. But I had to go through it as what I do in this community. You know what I do here. But I had to call that officer, yes sir, I understand, it won't happen again, in front of my sons, to train them what to do when I'm not around. And it paid off. The very next 6 months, my son, who is now going to Michigan for dental school, was pulled over coming from Bible study at 11 o'clock at night in Kennesaw, and made to get on the ground, pistols drawn because he was on the wrong side of the road, from Country Columbus. We don't have these medians like they have in Atlanta. And when he made his left, he turned too soon and was trapped on that side of the road. But he lived to tell me about it. That's the preparation that we have to do for our kids. And I wouldn't expect others to understand if you haven't been through it. But just hear the conversation. It's real. It's not fabricated.
Thank you, Carlos, for sharing that. respect what is being said, and I agree. But I really do think it's a cultural issue. And you have to just go back and look at slavery. You have to go back and look at the Civil War, post-Civil War, period of Reconstruction. And you can see how myths were intentionally constructed and how white supremacy was raised during those times to disenfranchise those at one time Africans, blacks who were coming through, and that still exists today, where there are those who believe in the myth that was constructed that Carlos, Sherricka, Geniece, Johnny Flakes are not as valued. There's a sense of inferiority that exists. Whether it's embraced or not, it exists. And until the culture is, one, acknowledged, identified, and until there is intentional policies put in place to make sure that if my son, my daughter, if I come into contact with the justice system, the legal system, that I will be given equal access, I will have equal justice. But right now, you can have the greatest accomplishments. If I wore jeans, a hoodie, or a skull cap, I'm seen as less than. It exists. And so, in order for that to change, we have to have those who are willing to enter into real conversation. Because nationally, at one time, maybe 10 years, or less, diversity was the hot topic. Everybody wanted to do diversity. All right? But it shifted. It shifted to equal access, equality. Just because I have diversity does not mean I have access to equality. And so that's the conversation that we here in Columbus have to truly look at in corporations, in whatever industry that we may find ourselves in, is look at whether the organization, whether profit or nonprofit, does it truly represent not just diversity, but does it really open up opportunities for access? And that is also in terms of the judicial system. We have to have judges. And I'll close with this. The thing that hurt me the most in just a couple of years, maybe 3 years or less, many of you know about the Gate case, right? Everybody know about the Gate case, where this person was actually convicted with circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial. I went to the Georgia Supreme Court, sat there, and heard both sides present his case. There was no evidence that actually placed him at the crime scene. None. None. And yet he got life in prison. He had served approximately 40 years, if I'm not mistaken, of that life sentence. There was an opportunity for the case to either be retried or to release him. And he had excellent attorneys. And yet we had a state Supreme Court retired justice to write a deposition, to write his position, showing that there was injustice, discrimination in terms of choosing the jury, gave his position. And the person who was sitting in the seat at the time, in terms of our district attorney, or did not respect the state Supreme Court justice to even give consideration. And when the justices heard the case presented in the state of Georgia, this is, quote unquote, that was stated, there was something wrong with this case. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, they did come and they released him. But it was on probation, I think. Is that right?
He was released on an Alford plea.
Pardon?
He was released on an Alford plea, so, but it meant that he's not exonerated. So he gets no restitution from the state, he gets no support, and he still has his record intact, so he can't work either. But he was released in May of 2020, and he took the Alford plea because he did not want to get COVID.
Yeah.
So after 43 years in prison, about 30 years on death row, he still lives in Columbus. He's my neighbor.
Thank you, so I'm not thinking about it. Thank you so very much for the validation. I think that speaks to our system of justice.
So just to add to that, so I was an assistant prosecutor, assistant district attorney before I came to Columbus, and I remember going to law school. I think I want to go to law school because I want to make a difference. I want to, help our communities. Then I said, well, I should be a public defender because as a public defender, I can help those who need representation. So I did that for a summer in Athens, Clarke County, and I sat there every single day. I would go to court, and I just found that there was I had no information about what was going on with the clients. The judges barely listened to the things that we were arguing. There was another 50 cases sitting there, and I was just like the intern assistant, so it's like, there's no power in this. No offense to any, to public defenders, because there is, because I'll share later. And I was like, well, then maybe I should look at the assistant district attorney's office, because they seem to have the power. They're making decisions. And I got to that office, and I found that there is a lot of power from the assistant district attorney. They are making decisions, what cases get charged, what cases go before the grand jury, what cases get pled out, what cases get probation, what cases get first offender status that don't even make it to a courtroom. And then you realize, though, that you have to have a good public defender on the other side of that case, because if they haven't done their job, then it's very difficult for you to do your job. And then I realized, though, even when you have the best case, so you have someone who is burglarizing, there is someone on all sides of the case. You have someone who is burglarizing the community. I realized, wow, they don't really have the power. Because I sat there and watched the judge give sentencing for a person who had committed burglaries in one community, probation after probation after probation, just let them keep coming back and burglarizing those communities over and over and over again. But another person who burglarized the community that judge happened to live in, who got substantially more time, the 5 to 20 type time. And I realized, well, that's not where the power is in the judges. The reality is the power is in the people who are in these positions. So when Reverend Flakes said that it has to be about the culture, we have to change each other, forgive me. We have to change ourselves because we're the ones making these decisions, and we're the ones putting people in leadership positions and judges positions. And if we're not changing our hearts, we're not having these hard conversations, getting people to open their eyes, then these injustices will keep happening. And they really are. Every institution is run by people. Whether you're talking about a police department or a school system or a city, there are people who have to be changed, and people who have to have the courage enough to root out where they see racism, root out where they see prejudice, be able to kick those people out of their systems. When it comes to police officers, I was really struggling because as an assistant district attorney, that's what we work with every day. So when we were watching these last 2 years, watching what's been happening in our society, I struggled with it because I thought I've met some courageous, wonderful police officers who risk their life every single day. But I want some courageous leadership to say, because I care about them so much, I won't let rogue and other officers and other people in our society be the definition of these entire institutions. So we've got to change each other. We've got to change our culture. We've got to see each other differently and have these conversations, even when they're uncomfortable. So.
Further talked about the wealth gap and the C-suite gap. Let's talk about a little bit about poverty. And a quarter of Black Americans in our nation live in poverty, while only a tenth of white Americans live in poverty. What can we do to sustainably, meaningfully, and sustainably lower the Black poverty rate in this country? And Reverend Flakes, I'll go to you.
Thank you for the question. You asked us to be very interactive and engaging.
Yes.
Yes. That's a very profound question you ask, because it has so many multifactorial aspects to it when it comes to what contributes to it. And I don't think there is an easy answer per se, because if there was, it would have been resolved. But I also think people have to want to resolve it. I think there is, and sometimes I get in trouble because I believe, I tell our congregation, I love you enough to tell you the truth. I love you enough to tell you the truth. And sometimes, truth is power, I want to hear truth all the time in the culture. I think there is a benefit to keep people in part. I think it's advantageous. It's economically advantageous. Why we see South Columbus not thriving like other communities within our city. That may be shocking to many, but I was talking with the person who just sat with me yesterday, who was considering running for a council seat, and a business owner, and shared with me how it is so difficult to actually establish just a business for a small business owner on the south side, because there are restrictions as it relates to opening up businesses there. But he did it, he stuck with it, and he had persistence, perseverance. I believe that in order to really help persons out of poverty, is again, I think it goes back to the culture and believing that those that are in poverty deserve to be out of it. I think that becomes a belief, a value that one must have, that I want to have opportunities that give access to resources that others may not have, where you have 3 generations deep of persons who do not have access to just minimum wage, or either, when you talk about $15 an hour, where people say, well, I really want to resolve, poverty, but there's no real robust movement to make certain things happen that will actually cause that to happen. There are attitudes that must change that make people think that people want to be in poverty. Their attitudes must change where people think that people are still lazy. These are embedded belief systems that basically causes persons to either not engage in real policy decision-making and actualizing those policies, or putting those policies in place in order to remedy, the poverty level. I commend organizations, churches who give out food. I commend organizations who actually help with clothing. But here's the real issue. After the food is gone, after the clothing has worn out, what gives the incentive the person to believe that my living arrangement, my standard of living will change? What is the sustainability? What do I have to look for that says that I can do better? And so I believe there has to be literacy, education, helping persons be aware of what's available, accessibility to resources. Banks have a role to play in making sure that they give access to resources to allow persons to become entrepreneurs. And so I'll stop there. I can go on, so I'll stop. Thank you so very much for your listening.
So this wealth gap, it's a huge undertaking. I think it has multi-levels that has to take place to make up for hundreds of years of getting started. I talk about my parents and in the 70s, those who were becoming professionals right after the Civil Rights Act, and those who became teachers and engineers and physicians and things of that nature. That was the first kind of wave that we saw of African Americans across the country being able to do well, like your dad and things like that. So that education is, we're casting our light on education with what we're doing with our church. When you take a young man in different areas of the city, and they see someone else driving a $110,000 car, and they can't even get through high school, they want to drive that car too. So what are they going to do? They're going to sell drugs to be able to drive that car, or they're going to rob somebody to get the money. They're going to do whatever. You're not going to convince someone that, well, if you don't go to school, you can't have that. They'll take it. Okay? So you have to figure out, how can we provide this opportunity for someone so that we have less shooters on the street and we have more educated people on the street? And so academics is a way to level the playing field. The problem comes, everybody doesn't have money to go to school. Even if they get the Hope Scholarship, what are you going to do? You have to stay somewhere. You have to eat. So it's not that simple for everyone. We just engaged with a program with Kendrick and partnering with CSU as well, because when we give, and no offense to it, but when we give $1,000 scholarships to individuals who already don't have money, they're going to end up spending that $1,000 on something other than education, because where are they going to get the other $18,000 from? And then we complain about school debt and relief school loans. Yeah, I mean, that's a temporary solution. I don't know where that's going, but we have to find a way to build from the ground up. The 70s wasn't that far away. I mean, it was just like yesterday, right? So education, our concept and our model with our school, Black people are not adverse to education. I mean, when we started the school, we said, where are you going to get some kids, some families to spend money on private education? I mean, nobody thought that was going to work, because out of the total, there may be 40 or 50 in the whole city that do private school. And we've got 57 families that pay for private education for their young Black scholars at our school. And I'm talking about his mothers who struggle to stroke that check. But it's important to them. So education, we're not adverse to education. I mean, we know that is a way out. And so when you take our school, when it's fully built out to the 8th grade, 360 families that have a heightened sense of awareness in math or science, with the mean pay for someone with a math degree getting out of college is $100,000. Those young men have a family of an average of 2. Then you've got 2 families coming from that 360, taking it to 700 families. Then those 700 families have a family of 2, taking it to 1,400 families. You're going to have to get some kind of systematic way to build this out long term. It didn't happen overnight. It's not going to be fixed overnight. So you have to have some type of model in place that says, if we're going to try to help this area, we're going to try to move this this race of people to a better place, I know that education matters because no corporation, no business owner is going to turn someone away that can help them make money. I haven't seen that yet. Haven't seen it yet.
And that's profound. Poverty is intergenerational, and wealth creation is intergenerational. And so how do we get from there to there? Other thoughts on our black poverty rate being way too high?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on too. It's not always like the person that doesn't have their lights on, or the commercials that we see, or people that we know that may look a certain way because of poverty. Sometimes it's literally in these corporations for real because of the pay. Like, we have people that are just not, like, they have the skill set, they have everything that qualifies them for a job, but the pay is just not there. So they're having to work multiple jobs to try to keep their families afloat and keep themselves going, keep the lights on. So I also think it starts with how organizations and companies are looking at pay. Like, you can't expect someone to survive, what is it 25,000 or 30? That's poverty level a year. 25,000. Right, so imagine someone trying to survive off of that. And as we look at like the cost of living, everything we've gone through with the pandemic, everything is going up. The pay needs to match that to keep up. Otherwise, you're down here struggling and trying to make ends meet. So I think it also has to start with organizations and everything with how they're compensating their employees so that they can have a fair shot.
Yeah, great. And the cliff effect as well, that if you make a little bit more money, you actually lose money because of the benefits go away. So I think we need to work on creating changes on that as well.
I also want to encourage people to get married. It's my 2 cents. I joke with my, don't start with me. I laughed, y'all laughed. I didn't really get it until I got to college and somebody said, do you have that dink? I was like, well, what? The dink. Y'all ever heard anybody talk about that? The double income, no kids? Do y'all have to hear that? I joke about it, but it matters. Like, I think we've gotten away. This is not necessarily just a racial thing. This is like a society thing. We've gotten away from the idea that marriage is a benefit. Like, it literally helps to build wealth when there are two people in a household. I also know that that's not an easy thing, and society has created some real big hurdles to marriage, especially in the African American community, But that's just about that.
Let me just pick it to this for a second. So, I just want, so the next United Way event has to be like a matchmaking thing for us, okay? So that we can fall in line with Geniece's idea, right?
That's a good idea.
Hey, Ben, I'd like to add that I think one of the things I have not heard, and I know this firsthand, is that poverty is also a mindset. And I can speak firsthand to family members who are comfortable where they are. And it's a negative look upon those who want to get up and get out. And we need to find some way to attack that mindset, right? We need to, and it's through exposure, which could be education, but it's not formal education in the classroom. It's how do we expose that what you see is not everyone's normal, that there is bigger than your neighborhood, it's bigger than your city, it's bigger than your state. I mean, and just being transparent, I remember I would have my nephews over, and they were like, can we go shopping to the local strip mall? And I'm like, that's not shopping. But to them, that's shopping because that's the only thing they had access to in their community. And so I think it begins with, we need to address mental health. And the mental health is knowing that this is not normal behavior, guys. This is deviant behavior. And even though it's a struggle, and even though you're comfortable with it, you need to get out of that mindset. You can put all programs in place, you can spend money in the community, and until you attack the mindset, you are not going to get rid of poverty. I mean, I don't think you're going to get rid of it completely anyway, but you're not going to begin to make an impact on poverty until we address the mindset of the people that are there.
And so mental health is a big piece that I don't hear people talk about. But I think that's one of the inroads that we need to look at is let's address, you know, some of the situations that make these people want to stay where they are.
But can I just say something to that, Erica? I think another part of that is when we talk about generational poverty and that we are systemically forcing people to be comfortable in that. And once that's extended on for so many generations, then we look at entitlement society. And they feel like, hey, we've been made to stay here. This is what I'm comfortable with. This is what I know. It was good enough for mom. It was good enough for grandma. This is how we live our life. This is just the way it is. So, I mean, I think going back to addressing that generational poverty and that root cause, when we can look at that, then that's going to lessen that effect of people being comfortable in that situation.
Can't teach what you don't know.
I would ask, if you haven't read the Monahan papers during the time of President Lyndon Johnson, he had research done because he was going to give a talk at Howard University, and it was going to be dealing with poverty. It's going to be dealing with how do you actually uplift, you know, particularly African American communities, Black communities. And based upon a section of the Monahan papers, it was recommended by his advisor because a piece of that was done by a psychiatrist, who basically was saying that inherently in African American communities, there is an inherent dysfunction. Inherently. And his advisor said, you're going to an African American college, and you're going to tell them that because they're where they are, because they're sick. And they advised him, you can't do this. And so I think we have to begin to look at, I think someone mentioned, systemic racism. Systems has a profound impact on poverty. We have to acknowledge and we have to actually have the conversation. If poverty is truly going to be eradicated, then we have to change systemic systems that perpetuate poverty. I don't believe people just want to be there. I don't believe people just want to stay where they are. I believe people have to be given exposure, different exposures. I do. But I just don't think that people wake up and say, I like being in a rat-infested place. Just don't believe that. And I think we have to basically really engage in having these conversations. I want to thank you for allowing us to have the conversation, asking the profound questions, and thank you all for being here to engage. But these are profound issues that preferably we would have wanted to resolve them before we leave. But I do have to say this. I believe the true answer to all of this, people's lives need to be saved. They need to have salvation. And that seems to be one of the areas that we tread lightly. And Geniece said, in order for things to really change, people's hearts have to be changed. Thank you.
We have time for one more?
Let's open the floor for questions.
Can we go to the pandemic real quick?
Very quick.
I do want to talk about COVID real quick and the disproportionate effect that it has had on the African American community and a little bit higher hesitancy to get vaccinated in the African American community. So I'll just open that up for some quick comments and then we'll shift to audience questions. So, good. Should we just go down the line?
I'll just say, I just think that people need to be honest and tell their true stories about what's really happening in society and what's happening with your family. And be willing to say, sometimes it's not, we've done enough. I think that our government has put out a lot of educational material about about the vaccine, about how it's safe, and I think that's all valuable. But in the end, I'm going to listen to the person I trust. So I think we just have to be willing to share those stories throughout our community about what it really means to us, how it has affected us, how it's changed us. Hey, I'm vaccinated, and it's given me some peace of mind, some comfort, and I'm well, I'm still here, but it's gonna have to come from people that we trust.
Yeah, I mean, we as a church have offered vaccinations as well as COVID testing. There has been so much effort gone into overcoming this pandemic. But in this type of situation, when we look at culture and we look at history, we kind of set ourselves up for this situation based on previous history. And so that's just going to be hard to overcome. And so I get frustrated with people all the time, you know, mothers, fathers, sons, everybody's dying. I'm like, when y'all going to get the vaccination? But, you know, you can't scream so loud because there is history there.
Yes.
And so everyone's reality is their reality. And so we just try to give them the information and pray about that as well. But yeah, I think the country has set it up to be this kind of question also.
I don't have much more to add. I was gonna kind of state the same thing. It's some of it is history, because people are just scared and don't know what to trust, who to trust, just because of past experiences. So I think if we can acknowledge some of that and maybe try to understand where someone is coming from, why they're hesitant, and help them to understand the benefits of it, then it may make a difference. It may not, but that's everybody's choice as well to decide whether or not, you know, they want to be vaccinated or not. But just helping them to see the benefits in trying to get past this pandemic, and just how so many people have lost their lives. So it's a reality. But I'll stop because I said I wasn't going to say anything. So that's it.
I just think we've moved from hesitancy to resistance because of what Carlos has said. I think we have inundated our communities with education. We brought in virtually a virologist, you know, expert, just basically had that person to speak up and ask things. But I think we've moved to resistance. Is to the point where people say, you can't tell me what to do. I'm going to do what I want to do. And I think we have to basically, as you said, respect their decision, but also bring up that this is the beloved community. Do you really care about the community? Do you care about each other?
It's about all of our.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to audience questions now. Betsy Covington.
I think y'all have given me the gift today of a lot to think about. And just when I think I've achieved a certain level of knowledge, I find out there's more I need. One of the things that's been resonating as I've listened to your real honesty is it's important for us to know history. My history, your history, but the factual history of our country and our codification of things like wealth gaps. Wealth gap didn't just happen. It was intentionally created. And for us to be able to take steps to dismantle that, we gotta know and all be on the same page about how we got here. So as we think about how we go forward in our country with education and curriculum, let's recognize the importance of honest education, which frankly I didn't get growing up. So that's important. We can't fix something if we don't understand what the problem is. So, not really a question, but just a confirmation of the why of a lot of what I think I'm hearing y'all say. So thank you.
And it's going to take time.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing. Sometimes we say, oh, we've been doing this for 2 years. We've had this program going for 3 years. Why do we not see the full change? But it took hundreds of years of institutional, systematic racism. It's going to take time. So we just have to also keep working.
Yeah, but let's don't be too patient.
Yeah. But don't give up. So good programs like United Way and a lot of the other programs that you all represent in here, don't give up and say, hey, I've given this thing 2 years and I've only seen a 2% increase in the population the way we want it. Keep going. We're talking about hundreds of years of intentional systems. So that's all.
I just wanted to jump in real quick and say as well with the education and history. We were talking earlier, there's a lot that you just have no idea that we should know, right? So I didn't know that there were Black women launching men into space until I saw Hidden Figures. Why am I learning about that as an adult, you know? I don't remember reading that in my books. And now, like a few years back, as there, a lot of the schools are trying to take Black history or, you know, these history out of the programs for the students to learn about what is that saying. So then I don't know my history, and it's not just Black history, it's everybody's history, so we all should know something about where we came from. Whether it's ugly, it is, it's not fun, and it's not that we're pointing fingers at what's happening, people today. I think you had said that earlier. It's not that, we're walking around and everybody that's white we feel is, against us. It's not that. We just have to have conversations that we can get through and realize how we can move forward. So I think it's in the schools with, let's talk about those uncomfortable subjects. And let's talk about, like, if a Black student is seeing someone that looks like Katherine Johnson, oh my goodness, I can do that, But if you take that away from me, I have no idea, which goes back to access and everything else. So it's just it's a cycle, but we have to start somewhere. So.
Time for one more?
Two more.
Two more questions. Yes, sir.
I guess my question is, how difficult is it to talk in like an open format like this? Like how much filtering in your mind?
So on the way over here, I was talking to myself, and I was like, I don't know what's gonna come out my mouth. I don't know what I'm gonna say. But just being mindful. You can have a conversation that may not be the easiest to talk about in a respectful way. So I think it can be done. It's just, sometimes you do have to pull back. You don't know who's watching or who might be, like, get her off. We don't want her around. But anyway, but we have to have those conversations just to keep it going. So that's my take on it.
It's I want to answer this. It's natural for me because we just live it. I think each one of us we live it every day, and so we've been afforded this opportunity to kind of share our experience with you all, and we appreciate that opportunity. And when you have the chance, because you're going to get an opportunity, make sure you share your truth. And remind that we have to go back to the book that we were all created in His own image and likeness of God. And so when we tell people the things that they're doing that hurt us, it can be done in a way that's not so combative all the time. And so that's where you want to be. So it's just natural for me.
Go ahead.
Sacrifice, having a conversation, someone said, if you're willing to have a conversation, you're willing to handle the sacrifice that comes with that, that may come with, people might look at you funny, it may affect, because I think about those things, does it affect their business, does it affect how people have a conversation with you? And kind of in order to get past where we are, what are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to sacrifice that uncomfortableness for a little while? Are you willing to sacrifice maybe a business that says, I don't know if I like that, or a manager that says, I'm not sure how he'll fit with my group. What are we willing to sacrifice in order to have these conversations and get to a different place? I think people before history have all made sacrifices.
But I think there's one quote that I remember, and that is, the true character of a person is not when a person can hear in conversation when everything is really safe, but it's when it's not so safe, when there's pressure, when there's the uncomfortableness. And so it's always, if you will, a risk, because we all want to be liked. We all want to be invited back. But the question is, will you take the risk to be honest? Will you take the risk to engage in the hard conversation and really tell people what they really don't want to hear? You have a lot of people who tell people what they want to hear, but it is the character of saying, I want to be honest, I want to be upfront. And prayerfully, people will take it in the right spirit, particularly if you want to move forward.
I just had a question. My husband and I are raising 4 boys. And what is the age that is the right age to start talking about those difficult situations, just as Pastor Coleman with the officer and, my boys go out to the bus stop and I'm telling him, be where the light is. He's the only one out there. Don't want anybody to think that you're someone to break into someone's house. But he don't understand why I'm telling him that. And he's 11. So what is the age? I have a set of twins that are 3, 11-year-old, and a 13-year-old. What is the age to start?
That will be yesterday. we've all seen the 9-year-old who was shot with a water gun 2 years ago. 3 grown men pull up and shoot a kid. What in the world? So I would encourage you to start today and share with them instances that happen. And then they're going to ask, well, why is that? Why do they see me that way? And then you have to share with them the history. You got to go all the way back. And always inform them that it doesn't have to be everyone. It's always going to be someone that fits that profile, because we have a profile, but others have a profile too. And they'll be surprised at the one that'll show up and encourage them and be a safe space. But like Pastor Flakes says, we've got to be safe. We've got to be prayed up. But for those young kids, you know, the 3-year-olds, they're not quite ready yet. But all my boys went through school here, and one thing that I gathered, which brought about Emmanuel Prep, is something happens in the 7th grade. Something happens with young black boys in the 6th and 7th grade and how they view us. And I don't think it's intentional. I remember my baby boy, Noah, he was in pre-K, and this guy, he would come up to me and he's like, my daughter says that she's gonna marry Noah. And I'm like, no, she's not. And he was just shocked, and it was a church school, and I'm like, because Noah's gonna grow up, and he's gonna be 6 foot, and he's gonna be strong, and he's gonna have hair on his arms, and you're not gonna be comfortable with her wanting to marry Noah. But it was the truth of the matter. Now, I didn't have that conversation with him in pre-K, but I had it with her father to let him walk a mile in our shoes. And let's not prepare him for that. And then all of a sudden, when he's in the 7th and 8th grade, you're afraid of him. Because we know they become of that age where, you know. So let's not do that with him. It's kind of where I was at. But just have to always be situationally aware. But yeah, talking is today.
I want to jump in on that real quick too. So I don't have any kids, but I'm an auntie. And my nephew is 8. And since he was little, just because of, what I know he will probably encounter as he gets older, I would tell him, like, every morning, he was like 2, 3 years old, I'm like, you have beautiful brown skin, you have, your hair might be, it's nice, because people gonna tell you it's nappy, or it's not good hair, and all this stuff. So I'm like, you got good hair, any hair on your head is good, and you're smart, but just trying to build him up, because I know at some point, like you said, the bullies are coming, and people are just gonna not like you, and I want you to feel strong and confident in your skin, who you are as a young black man, because you're gonna get all these punches. And he never asks, as he gets older, like he shares different things with me, he hasn't encountered anything, just that has been so devastating to him yet. But just trying to prepare him early so that he knows these are the things that you're gonna face at some point. And then one thing that I don't know if you all watched the Emmett Till, the whole women's movement. So I've always been curious. Like, I love history, so I'm gonna watch it even though it's not fun. But watching how she prepped Emmett for what he would face, especially back then, really is no different than what we're living through now. But she was trying her best. Miss Mamie was trying her best to get him ready. You're going from the north to the south. It's a different mindset. People automatically look at you different. So I think if we prepare them the best that we can to their age ability, and just letting them know, because he had questions, and she would just give him like these loving affirmations about, different things that how he was, and, he stuttered, but she would get him through that. And just giving them those tools to equip them so that when it does happen, it's still gonna hurt, but so that they'll be ready. I think that there's something we can do from really infancy on, so that they're used to hearing, that. So.
And Sherricka, you really spoke to what the research is showing, the earlier aspects in terms of looking at, those who are in daycares, particularly your academies, your development centers. Those young minds are so impressionable, and so the messaging that one gives It's very, very important. They may not know why at the moment, but if you actually begin to train them in just giving them the information, then there will come a time that they will begin to start asking questions why, which will begin to prompt the training that one has already instilled in their minds. I say this is the litmus test. If you ask your child if they go in the cookie jar, or if they did something that was out of order, and they look in your eyes and you know they did it, and they say, no, mommy, I didn't do it, it's time.
All right. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Thank you all. Thank you all. On behalf of our staff and United Way, this has been an amazing event. Happy Black History Month, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you all. Thank you.